Well, welcome back to the second portion of the program. And our second guest will be Pierette Domenica Simpson, a native of Pranzalito near Torino, and a survivor of the shipwreck of the Andrea Doria, the Italian luxury liner that sank on July 25th, 1956, when it was struck by the Swedish liner Stockholm. Pierette is also the author of the books Alive on the Andrea Doria, the greatest sea rescue in history, and I was shipwrecked on the Andrea Doria, the Titanic of the 1950s. In 2016, Simpson wrote and produced the documentary Andrea Doria, Are the Passengers Saved?, directed by Luca Guardabascio, and was shown in Pittsburgh, and that is when Pierette and I first met. Pierette, welcome to the program.
Grazie mille, Viviana, and it's good to reconnect with you.
Absolutely. Pierette, obviously you have an amazing story to share with our listeners tonight. You are from a smaller town near Torino, and can you tell our audience at what age you came to the U.S., and actually why did you come to the U.S., and who were you traveling with on the Andrea Doria?
Well, I come from a town called Pranzalito, which is near Ivrea. Most people know Ivrea as opposed to the village, which is near Torino. It's a UNESCO site, Ivrea, by the way.
Is that where they have the battles of the orange? Do they still do that? Ivrea has this very unique event. It's called the Battle of the Oranges. Sorry for the interruption,
yes.
But it's a very unique event of Ivrea.
They love it, but I've never seen it. I left Italy when I was 9.
Mm-hmm.
And I left with my grandparents. We were farmers. And my mother had immigrated to America 8 years before, so I literally did not know my mother. I was 15 months old when she left to create a better life in America for us. And my grandparents wanted to remain a part of my life, so they sacrificed everything. They sold their farm and animals and all their possessions, and what they could, they them in the big trunks on the Andrea Doria. And we were coming to the New World in 1956 to meet my mother and the new family that she had created here.
Mm-hmm. And the Andrea Doria was the fiore all'occhiello, the pride of post-war Italy. Yes. It was a glamorous transatlantic ocean liner, and it was defined as a floating art gallery. There was so much modern design and carried celebrities on board. And I believe their first voyage was on January 14th, 1953. And the one you were on was supposed to be their last one. Is that correct?
No, not that I know
okay.
of. It was the last one. It was Voyage 101, but there was no expiration date on the voyages.
I might have read that curiosity that they don't want to stop at 100, so they had to push it to 101. But anyway, this is just a little detail.
I'll have to look into that.
But
I don't think so, though, but I'll look into it.
But obviously, this was a memorable and unforgettable evening. It was an evening where there was a lot of fog, and that's what the captain, Pietro Calamai, was reporting officially.
Yeah, can you give us a little bit of your recollection as a 9-year-old on this huge luxury liner? It must have been quite the experience. And what are your recollections of the events when the collision occurred?
Well, during the trip, it was fun for me, not necessarily for my grandmother, who was absolutely paranoid of being near water, much less on water. But she let me go in the swimming pool. It was the first ship to have 3 swimming pools, one for each class. Mm. So I spent my days in the pool with a young lady named Norma DiSandro, who would later pass away from injuries, and Pat Mastincola, who was my age, and he's still alive along with his sister. He saved his sister's life, by the way, because he was such a daredevil on the ship. He knew every corner of it, and managed to get through the hallways in the dark to save his sister from the bow of the Stockholm piercing through her cabin and through her bed. It was just unbelievable. But it was really 8 wonderful days of a 9-day journey, and we had wonderful food, and most of the time the sea was calm, except for one day. But on the last night, when my grandmother and I decided to celebrate arriving into the New World, and we had reached near Nantucket Island, and so we were dancing and singing. My grandfather decided to be very prudent and be in his cabin below. We were in 3rd class. And keep his briefcase with him and get ready and rested for the New World. At 11:10 p.m., on a very foggy day, as you said, and foggy night, our horn was blowing every 2 minutes as prescribed by maritime law to warn other ships in the area. And all of a sudden, at 11:10 p.m., we felt this tremendous jolt, and the ship went up in the air from the right side, tilted to the left, the port side, went back to center, and then inclined drastically, almost 20 degrees immediately, which was never calculated by naval architects and marine engineers, to the starboard side. We were inside the dance hall, as I mentioned, stunned, and furniture thrown all over, people injured, screaming, lights flickering on and off. We had no idea what had happened until someone said they were outside and they had seen another ship coming at us and piercing us, piercing our starboard side. And later we found out it was 1/3 within the ship, and all 3 classes, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. And it was a very large hole that would bring in tons of water per hour, I guess I should say, that would cause immediate beginning of sinking. Fortunately, we didn't sink right away. We had an 11-hour period where we could be rescued. So meanwhile, my grandfather somehow made his way up the stairs in water and oil and fumes-filled hallways, and rolled up his pant legs, put his hat on, he had a suit on. Most people didn't even have anything on other than curtains or whatever they could manage to throw over their bodies to make it up to the deck. And he found us in the social hall, where by this time, a few hours later, we had been sitting on the floor and praying Ave Maria, piena di grazia. Of course, at the hour of our death.
Totally chaotic.
Very different meaning. So we were together, at least. And then finally, someone came to the deck doors and announced that rescue ships had arrived. Now, this is probably 2 in the morning. Mm-hmm. Hard to know, at what time we heard that announcement, and found that we had to crawl upward in this terrible incline to try to get out the deck doors on the high side and make our way down to the lower side where the lifeboats were waiting for us. And these were lifeboats from Not our ship necessarily, because on the starboard side, it was leaning so drastically that we could not get into the lifeboats. So people had to either be lowered by ropes like me, or jump into the ocean like some people did, or make it down a rope on their own accord like my grandparents did, even though they were so scared of water. And we made it into the lifeboat below. On the other side, the port side, the lifeboats would not be lowered because the incline was so steep that they had never been designed. The davits had never been designed to release the lifeboats into the water. So people were just waiting there for hours in the dark, hoping for some kind of mercy. And fortunately, there were brave people who lowered us. There were brave sailors who came from the Ile-de-France, even from the Stockholm, which was the ship that collided into us, broadsided us. And the Coast Guard, naval training ships, fruit freighters, sailing ships. It was just an amazing sea rescue, called the greatest sea rescue in peacetime history.
Now, obviously, the facts that you're sharing with us, in this very calm voice, and we really appreciate it, because I'm sure, again, it must have been screaming, probably even limbs and blood, all that things that you would associate with a shipwreck. And it was indeed the greatest rescue in history. Obviously, there is also the part of the litigation and the determination of fault that went on for quite some time. What do you know about what went on to determine? Well, we know now, but for all those years of investigation.
Well, that's the very complicated part. It didn't go on long enough as far as the Italians were concerned, the captain and the crew, etc., because most of them never got to testify, or if they did, it was for a very short time in the courts of New York. What is very interesting is that both ships filed suit and accused one another of a fault, and the same insurer for both ships was Lloyd's of London. Pretty hard to fight Lloyd's of London and any decisions they make. So there were hearings, but there was never a trial. And the officers and the captain complained later that they did not have a chance to speak. And the Italians did not know English, where the Swedish people did, the Swedish captain and crew. So when they testified, they could, be understood, whereas we, the Italians, were relying on a translation that was not necessarily accurate. So the survivors and families of the deceased, 46 of them on the Andrea Doria, 5 on the Stockholm, but the 46 passengers of the Andrea Doria's families were filing. They were listing their loss of belongings, loss of life, as was requested by the Italian line, by the courts, I assume. And they were sending them in, and the amounts were staggering. So Lloyd's of London made the decision that there was just not enough evidence to decide who was at fault, even though all the evidence was available. The course recorder was really all that was needed, and human testimony and witnesses. But that's what was decided. So we had to abide by.
Oops.
I think it was $85 million that we were claiming in loss of life and property.
Mm-hmm.
We got $6 million and had to divide that up among all of the people, the claimants. So basically, there was never a fault assigned. And later, not much later, Alvin Moscow, an author, New York Times journalist, wrote a book called Collision Course, and he wrote it while in Sweden at the invitation of the Swedish government and the Swedish line, and it was definitely not favorable toward the Italian crew and captain. As you know, and you explained very well to me when you wrote that you understood that the Andrea Doria was meant to be the symbol, the icon of Italy's resurgence from the ashes of World War II. So we had a really hard time making ourselves be in a good light. Mm-hmm. So Mr. Moscow realized that Italians had the reputation of being cowardly, World War II, Mussolini, the mafia, et cetera, whereas the Nordic people were seen as rational and courageous and detailed, et cetera. So it was not obvious, but implied very heavily in Collision Course, the book, who was at fault, even without, stating this is who was at fault. But that sealed public opinion for years until the next book was written, and then the next book was written, which were basically very similar to one another.
Am I correct that at some point, and we're coming also close to the end of the program, that actually Pietro Calamais was indeed clear of any accusations, but he is one of those captains, whereas the Swedish captain eventually went back to sea, but Pietro Calamais never sailed again, where he was cleared of any possible responsibility in a letter that he actually never opened before dying.
Yes. There was a naval engineer named John Carruthers who did the research along with Captain Robert Mern of the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy. And by that time, in the 70s, they had developed a computer simulation at the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy so they could put human testimony and all the scientific details within this KORF, this computer simulation, and come up with a plausible explanation of what had really happened. Before that, there was no evidence of what had happened. So the authors of the 3 books that I mentioned earlier simply wrote what they had heard, what they had read in the newspapers, and it was not based on science. So fortunately, these 2 gentlemen did have evidence that cleared him. However, the captain never got it because he died 2 months before they arrived in Genova to show him the proof that they had. When I found out that the Captain Mern of the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy knew what had happened and that it was never published to the public, and I was part of the public that was blaming both the Stockholm and the Andrea Doria, I was furious. I couldn't believe that a whole country and the whole marine industry had really been, put a
defamed, basically,
on
right?
them, stain on them, exactly, and no one was going to clear them. Well, I had been a language teacher for 37 years, and I decided that I was going to become an author and clear the captain and the crew's names. So that's when I wrote Alive on the Andrea Doria and later made the film, because this was just injustice against Italians. It was injustice toward the truth of what had really happened. And it was, like you said, a stain toward the maritime industry, where it should have been a glorious trip, another glorious trip, 101, that made Italy look like they were great master mariners and shipbuilders.
Indeed. Pierette, we are actually out of time, and I do recommend everyone to actually follow Pierette both on her website but also on her Facebook, because there is actually a new exhibit that I just opened up a few days ago at the Noble Maritime Museum, the Andrea Doria Rescue at Sea, that has a lot of artifacts from the life ring to the ship's brass bell to underwater footage of the diving team recovering to 1,000-pound ceramic mural panels by Italian artist Guido Gambone. So please do follow Pierette Domenica Simpson, and you will see footage. Also, the documentary was just spectacular. Pierette, it's time for us to say goodbye for tonight, but I do hope that our paths are going to cross again. Maybe you'll come back to Pittsburgh for a second time.
Yes, that would be great. Or maybe we'll meet on Staten Island at the exhibition.
Benissimo. That sounds like a great invitation.
Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you so
and
much,
Todd Boyer's exhibition of his artifacts that he recovered himself, along with the help of cover divers, is there. And we really would love the public to go there and see what masters the Italians were in so many domains.
Well, grazie mille again. And unfortunately, our hour is almost up.
And il Big Ben ha detto stop. Buona serata, Pierette.
And it's time for us to say arrivederci and alla prossima. We want to thank you all for tuning into the program. If you have any questions or comments, please contact us at the Italian Radio Hour at gmail.com. We would love to hear from you. Who will be our guest next week?
Well, our guest will be Mary Meniti, founder of the Italian Garden Project, Rosetta Costantino, author of the cookbook My Calabria, who has an extensive Calabrese-style garden, Michaela Smith, the director of the documentary Heirloom, and the conversation is going to be about the importance of growing a vegetable garden in Italian-American culture.
And remember, if you or any of your family and friends have missed a prior episode or would like to listen to this episode again, please visit our website at www.istitutomondoitaliano.org and click on the Italian Radio Hour tab.
Vorremmo ringraziare le nostre ospiti Cristina Bauerman e Pierette Domenica Simpson, il nostro sponsor Istituto Mondo Italiano e la Boara per la Musica. Finally, before we leave, here is our trivia question for next week. What does come il cacio sui maccheroni mean? Again, what does come il cacio sui maccheroni mean? You can send in your answer to the Italian Radio Hour at gmail.com.
And remember, if you are not living in the Pittsburgh area or you might be out of town, remember you can catch us streaming live at khbradio.com every Thursday at 5 p.m. And be sure to like us on Instagram and Facebook at the Italian Radio Hour. Until next time, alla prossima. Ciao, ciao.
The Italian Radio Hour has been sponsored by Istituto Mondo Italiano.